This interview was conducted in April of 2006, the day after Carlos Fuentes gave a lecture at Dartmouth College in honor of Susanna Zantop. I interviewed him in the car ride to Brown University, where he was to speak that afternoon. Also in the car were my advisor and Dartmouth professor, Beatriz Pastor, and his wife, Silvia.
Well, anything would be better in the United States than what you have as a government and as a cabinet. It's really very low quality, given the fact that this country produces eminent intellectuals, has great universities, and then the people who arrive in government are very mediocre. In Latin America, the situation has been very different. In the first place, because writers have spoken for those who have no voice. The weight of illiteracy, poverty, joblessness in Latin America has been so great throughout our history that if the writers didn't speak out for the people, nobody would. Right. The governments were corrupt, etc. Things have changed now. We mostly have democratic governments in Latin America, so the position of the writer has changed. It is not as Neruda used to say, Pablo Neruda, a Latin American writer walks around with the body of his people on his back. Now we have citizens, we have public means of expression, political parties, Congress, unions. So the writer's position has changed. We now consider ourselves to be citizens, not spokespeople for everybody, but citizens that participate in the political and social process of the country. You also speak of the question of holding posts, which used to be a distinguished position writers had. Most writers in Mexico have had posts as ambassadors, secretaries. That is no longer the case. It is no longer the case because now a writer can live off writing. He has an audience, their publishing houses, their newspapers, so the situation is not as terrible as it used to be when there were no means, no outlets for the writer to make money, and he had to go into government service, be an ambassador or a cabinet minister, etc. So things are changing in the sense that the civil society is now the protagonist in Latin America, along with the institutions of the civil society, political parties, unions, parliament, and the writer therefore occupies a different position, but no less influential than in the past in a new democratic society.
How do you position yourself? Do you consider yourself a writer in exile? How would you comment on the relationship?
I've never considered myself a writer in exile because I grew up outside my own country, because my father was a diplomat. Therefore, I grew up in Brazil, in Chile, Argentina, the United States. I studied in Switzerland. So I've always had a relation of perspective with my country. I'm thankful for that. I mean, there are really two types of writer. Our greatest novelist ever, Juan Rulfo, the author of Pedro Páramo, never left Jalisco and the states of Mexico where he sold tires and drove around and heard stories. He's the great example of a writer very much bred, rooted in the country, that transforms all he has heard into great art. My position was very different because I had a perspective on Mexico since I was a child. I was a boy of 10 when President Cárdenas expropriated the oil holdings of foreign companies, and there was a wave of anti-Mexicanism in the United States. There were big headlines, Mexican communists steal our oil. Then I lost friends at school. I was in grade school. I was looked upon with suspicion. So I was always meant to feel that I was a Mexican. And I was the son of a diplomat. I heard the news from Mexico. I sided with Mexican causes. So I grew up in a kind of exile until I was 15 years old, always outside of Mexico, but always very conscious that I was a Mexican. So that gave me a consciousness of being Mexican, different from someone who had never left Mexico. So it works both ways. For a moment there, I could have become an Argentinian or a Chilean who's very bounded to my friends, my schools in Santiago and Buenos Aires. But no, Mexico always won me over. And you know why? Because Mexico always was and always will be a mystery for me. A big question mark. What is this country all about? How can I understand it? You know, when Garcia Marquez doesn't understand the Baroque political situation in Mexico, he goes to the National Museum of Anthropology and stands before the Coatlicue, the mother goddess of the Aztecs, a gigantic sculpture, a block of serpents, headless, tremendous, of a goddess saying, I am a goddess, not a person. Don't try to find personality in me. I'm not Venus. I'm Coatlicue, the goddess of serpents. And when he has stood 5 minutes in front of Coatlicue, he says, now I understand Mexico, and leaves. So it's a very complex, mysterious country, and I will never understand it fully, and that's why I write so much about it, in order to try to understand it.
Do you have any comment on Juan Goytisolo in particular?
I have a lot of comments on Juan Goytisolo. I think, frankly, directly, that he is the greatest living Spanish author from Spain. But I've always refused to call Goytisolo merely a Spanish author, an author from Spain. I consider him part of the Hispano-American literature. For a long time, Goytisolo was not published in Spain. Franco's censorship would not have him. So he was published in Mexico. He was published in Buenos Aires. He is really the typical example of the unity of the Spanish language. The fact that we are 500 million people who think and speak in the Spanish language. So I consider Goytisolo a Spanish-American writer, along with Garcia Marquez or Cortázar or myself. And certainly, from any measure, a worldwide writer, a universal writer of the highest caliber. A man capable of extraordinary experiments. He takes fantastic risks. He's never content with what he does, which is always the sign of a good writer. Once you're contented with what you do and feel comfortable in your writing, I think something is wrong with you. You have to be very angry, very discontented, and always looking for different things. And I think he's a prototype. More than me, more than any one of us, Goytisolo is the great experimental, daring, risk-taking author of the Spanish language. What is happening is a double-edged sword. There is a U.S. responsibility. The United States needs these workers. I mean, the United States would not eat. It wouldn't have breakfast without Mexican workers. They pick up the oranges, the tomatoes, they do the work nobody else wants to do. Somebody wants to do it. I hope that someday Mexico will give full employment to our workers. Then the United States will have to look for these workers another place. In Papua, New Guinea, the North Pole, I don't know where. But it will need these people to do the work nobody else will do in a post-industrial society that does not want, in some instances, to recognize itself as such. The United States still thinks that it is a 19th century industrial society. It isn't that any longer. It has to adapt to a new reality. But we have a grave responsibility in Mexico, which is to give work to our own people. Yeah. As long as we have a system that denies work to 50% of the population, you'll have immigrants coming to the United States. When we have a better, more social, more responsible, less egotistical, less corrupt system, we'll be able to give work to the millions of Mexicans who have to build our roads, our dams, our sewers, our schools, all the things that are left undone in Mexico while we have the manpower. I see trains loaded with Mexican workers going north. I say, why are not they doing the work that is needed in Oaxaca, in Tabasco, in Chiapas, in Yucatan, everywhere? Why? There is something very bad going on both sides of the border. But the worker is a worker. He's not a criminal. He or she are not criminals. The Sensenbrenner Act is a monstrosity. It's a monstrosity that criminalizes the fact that people need work and that this country needs the work. So I'm in favor of a solution such as the Kennedy-McCain proposals, that make it clear what steps have to be taken to accept the fact that the United States needs foreign workers. I'm not specifying Mexican workers, but foreign workers to do the work that nobody else wants to do. There has to be some legal solution, some peaceful solution, which is not the criminalizing of the worker as the horrendous Sensenbrenner bill asks for. Well, what I see is the contrary of fear. I see extreme courage. When I see millions of people in the street of Los Angeles, of Seattle, of Omaha, of all places, what I'm seeing is an act of courage, not an act of fear. Some of them, I read today, have been penalized for taking part in the marches. They've been thrown out of their jobs. They will come back, or somebody else will come, because the work has to be done. It's as simple as that. But I think there is no fear. There is courage. On the contrary, before there used to be fear. This is comparable to the Cesar Chavez's movement, when all these workers came out of the shadows into the streets. Now the immigrants are also coming into the streets, and the worst that could happen is the apocalyptic day without Mexicans, in which this country would come to a standstill. It would then ask for Mexican workers to come back as soon as possible, because this country would not feed itself, it would not educate itself, it would not transport itself without the Mexican worker. Like criminals, first of all. Like criminals, or also like slaves. If the employers are taskmasters. But I feel there's, thanks to these manifestations we have seen lately, there's a great sense of the community between migrant workers, which is the forecast of what I believe in, which is that this, which is not a problem, it is an opportunity. Migration is an opportunity, not a problem. And in the sense that it is an opportunity, it starts with the unilateral law from this country, the Kennedy-McCain Act, let's say. It goes on to a bilateral agreement between Mexico and the United States and El Salvador, the United States and the Dominican Republic, whatever you wish. And finally, it has to be a multilateral international event. I'm in favor of an international union of migrant workers that really takes in the problems that affect Europe, with the migrants coming from Africa and the Arab countries, and the United States with the migrants coming from Mexico and Latin America. It has to be considered an international question with international solutions and with no problems, national or international. Migration is not a problem, it is an opportunity.